National Federation of the Blind. Live the life you want through science, technology, engineering, and math. This video captures a conversation between a mother and father about how they fostered curiosity in their blind daughter throughout her childhood by going to the county fair, building roller coasters, throwing pebbles, participating in the science fair, and more.
Hi, I'm Dave Blair. I'm a scientist. I'm the father of a blind child named Caroline, who's now 20 years old and in college.
And I'm Pat Renfranz and Caroline's mom. I'm also a scientist, I guess at heart, I think is basically how I think about it. And yeah, we thought we'd talk about how to foster curiosity, really in any child, but sort of some of the special considerations that a parent or caregiver has to make when the child has a visual impairment.
Exploring the county fair.
When Caroline was very little, she went to the county fair and met animals. And it's a place where people don't say no. You know, it's their own animals that they raise, and they say, sure, come on, meet my pig, meet my rabbit, whatever. And Caroline loved that.
But it's a great environment for fun and for any kid to be able to interact with the people and the exhibits. But especially if your kid's blind and you want your kid to be able to get their hands on stuff, the monster pumpkin or the bunny rabbits and the pig. You know, you have some 14-year-old 4-H guy back there with his goat, and he doesn't care if you come over and figure out what a goat is, right? He's not worried about it. So it was a great atmosphere to just relax and not be intimidated by the fear of being told no, you can't do it.
Discovering what's inside a golf ball.
If Caroline, if your daughter asks, what's inside a golf ball? If you feel mischievous enough, and if you have the tools, you can go out into the garage and drill a hole in your golf ball and saw your way through the golf ball and discover together by dissecting a golf ball what's in there. It's easy, it doesn't take long, and it's fun. And you can drill a hole in your workbench while you do it, and your daughter has a good laugh out of that.
Learning about mountain climbing.
With mountain climbing, she was very interested in like Dave said, in the tallest peaks and the trials of climbing, being an alpinist, I guess. But she was also, we wanted to make sure that she understood sort of the geography of the big mountain ranges. And this was one thing that took the little extra step, I think, for her as a blind person, was that I think it was at the time that Eric Weinmayer was doing his climb, or maybe he had completed his climb at that point, to Everest. And I think it was there was a company, I think, called All Terrain or something like that, and they had built him like a human-sized model of Mount Everest and the region around it so that he could study in 3 dimensions the shape of the mountain. And I can recall seeing a picture of him standing next to this like table-sized mountain Everest model. And at the time, this was I don't know how many years ago, 12 years ago or so, there weren't 3D models around. I mean, it wasn't easy to get something like that made. But the company that made this huge model for him, they had a name, they had some contact information, and I actually got my nerve up, and I think I wrote a little script out for myself, and I called this place expecting the answer to be, no, we can't help you with anything, or we'll sell you one for $5,000. And it was one of those experiences as a parent of a blind child where you ask for something a little bit more than what a typical child might require. You explain the situation, and the person on the phone, she was so nice. She just said, yeah, we'll just send you one in the mail. And they sent us this, I don't know, it was like 4x4 feet. It was probably about 2 feet tall,
Very
the
detailed.
peak of Everest, with this incredible detail.
It took over the whole table for months.
Yeah, we had it for a long time. They never bugged us to send it back. We finally did, but it was fantastic because it was then, you know, she could explore the terrain of it. She could say, oh, here are the Khumbu ice falls, here's the South Col, here's the little mountain, not little, but the second peak that's on the same kind of prominence of the mountain, and here's the Hillary Step. And it was just a way for her to engage in the geography of the place that was beyond the words of it, you know. And maybe someday she'll go there, but
whenever you can get a model, I mean,
Yeah.
there's nothing like it's obvious enough. A tactile model, a real representation like that is hugely helpful.
Yeah.
And this was a wonderful, pleasant surprise. And you get what you ask for. It's great that you made the phone call. That's necessary.
Designing roller coasters.
Roller coasters are fun for everybody, and there are tons of physics. Teachers love to go take kids to amusement parks, and Caroline Stilling's interested in that. I think she aims to bag all the big roller coasters in the world. And I think
But that's something that can turn into model building, for example. So there was, what was that kit called where you could like create a track and you could vary the height of the track, and it was a metal marble.
Yeah, but it was a roller coaster kit. You could design your own and learn about when it's going to fly off the track and how high it has to be or stay on the track on a loop-de-loop. Yeah. That was really fun.
So that's a case where having fun at something, in this case just an amusement park, which you wouldn't say that, well, that's not science, right? The amusement park. But then you bring it home and you have a kit where you can play around with, let's vary the starting height of the marble and see what kind of velocity you can use. Then you can use the science words, right? It needs a certain velocity to make it around the loop-de-loop.
That's right. You got permission to use the science words if you had enough minutes of fun. It's okay. Yeah. Another track I recommend is called GeoMag. Little steel balls and magnets, and you can assemble them into different shapes. And it's very contained. It's easy to do it in a small space with your hands, and we would work together to build the so-called platonic solids. This is important in mathematics, so at a young age she could tell you what the 5 platonic solids are. And that was also fun.
Connecting science to the everyday.
On our way here, we asked Caroline, what were things that we did when you were a child to help foster curiosity. We wanted to get some feedback, and I was sort of expecting her to say something kind of more
complex,
something more kind of technically science related maybe. But the first thing that she thought of was, she said, not anything particular, but when I was little and we used to go to the park and I would throw stones in the creek, that was a really good experience for me in becoming curious. So that was just this thing we would do on Saturdays after we went to kinder music or whatever. We'd go to the park,
play on the slides,
do all that. Yeah. But then there was a little creek ran through the park, and there were little stones, and she could gather stones and she'd throw them in, and there'd be a big laugh when one was really clonk, and there were various sound effects that you guys would do, and how far do you pitch the stone, and how big is the stone, and things like that. And what she said the other day was that I don't think it was sort of cognitive in a way, but what she was learning about is, okay, I have 2 stones, this one's light, this one's heavy, and if I throw the light one in, it makes a little plunk, and if I throw the heavy one in, it makes a big plunk, and we get a big laugh, So she was doing experiments in a sense as a 3-year-old, not because it was science or because she had scientist parents or because, she had, she was studying maths or anything like that. It was just, it was fun, but she was learning how to pose a question to the world, to nature.
Entering the science fair.
Science fairs came up for us because when Caroline was starting in 3rd grade, they were required as part of her classwork. So through 3rd grade through 9th grade, she was required to do a science fair project, and it was a great way to bring, not just for her to learn about science process and for her to take ownership of what question she wanted to ask, but it was also a way for her to work with you, primarily because you were a great guide in how to pose a question, how to make a question testable, how to turn the curiosity, in this case about airplane wings, or the curiosity about one poster she had about which glues will hold the most weight for the longest time, to turn that curiosity into science. So to take curiosity into science means that you have a controlled environment, that you have that you repeat your test as many times as you can, things like that. So there are ways of as a parent to guide your child from a curious child into a scientist.
It's important that the child comes up with their own questions. It has to be directed by the child. And Caroline likes heat and cold, for obvious reasons. You can feel things. She learned early on that black things get hotter than light things, and became very curious about that. She did a number of posters on thermodynamics, not by that name.
She didn't call it that.
She didn't call it that, but
I didn't call it that.
When you paint styrofoam balls black, how much hotter do they get? And does it depend on how large or small they are? It turns out to actually be a subtle question. And she did a nice job on that too. Does rubber or metal carry more heat? Heat it up in the oven, put it in water, how much heat does it carry? That was a great question for her also. And that's practical, that's important for thermal ballast in solar homes, and so forth. Another was the principle of swamp coolers, blowing a fan across water and seeing how much faster it would cool. The graphs have to be accessible to Caroline because she has to explain it. She needs to really comprehend it, and we didn't bring it, but just an important adjunct to this is her notebook. She had a notebook both in print and braille, so when she presented the poster she could show that here's the print for you, but just so you know, here's the braille, and I'm reading to you, and you see the same thing, and they get that appreciation for direct involvement in all aspects of this.
And that's how blind people do STEM. For more information, visit blindscience.org. This material is based upon work supported by the National Science Foundation under grant number 1322855. Any opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this material are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Science Foundation.